general one. It's very broad, but it seems to get things going. I mean, obviously we're living in a pretty intense time in our evolutionary history. How would you describe the present state of the world?
I think humankind is in the midst of an epochal shift from a predatory strategy to a dignitarian, what I call a dignitarian strategy. The realization that actually dignity works. It will increase your bottom line more than the old traditional predatory strategy, which is put fear into your employees, put fear into anyone you can, keep everyone off guard, and advance yourself at other people's expense. Now, it almost sounds like I'm moralizing, but I'm not. That predatory strategy has worked really well up till approximately the 20th century. And in the 20th century, it suffers some very grave and I think significant defeats. The German and the Japanese attempt to build empires didn't work in the 20th century. The similar impulse of the British and the French in the 17th and 18th centuries worked really well from the point of view of self-aggrandizement. Both those countries exploited African and Asian nations to their own benefit. Nobody thought to think it was anything but wonderful, except perhaps the victims. But the Germans and the Japanese attempt to build empires did not work. And ever since, all sorts of predatory attempts have fallen flat. Some still work in small ways, but you can see deeper reason. Not only is this an empirical finding, there are deeper reasons why the predatory strategy is outlived its usefulness.
How would you describe the forces at play in this world today? What are the forces creating such a conflicted world?
Well, it seems terribly conflicted, and all the headlines are very depressing. But it doesn't seem conflicting compared to the 40s. To me, I was alive in the 40s, and we were in a grand world war involving almost the entire planet. That was a bigger conflict than the more limited ones we see today, and that's what I mean. I think wars have not been going well lately. Even big powers like the United States have left most recent wars with their tail between their legs, just trying to get out of it, wishing they'd never started it. And that's a big difference from when I was a kid and we were triumphant and we thought we had set the world straight. And at least we had put an end to two pretty nefarious dictatorships, 2 or 3. So, will you ask another question?
It seems that yes, there was a pretty obvious in the 40s. It seems, I wasn't obviously not alive in the 40s, but it seems like it was pretty obvious who the good guys and the bad guys were. It seems even within populations now there is conflict, there's polarization. I guess the States is a very good example of that, where there's an extreme, well, it seems like there's an extreme right and extreme left, and they don't seem to find any common enemy.
Right. I mean, are you thinking now of the United States with the right and the left division?
Well, it seems even it's in Canada now, too. Canada seems to be going that direction.
Too, yeah,
and
that's right.
I don't know about Europe, but...
Go ahead.
Sorry, so what's your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I think it's a phase we're going through. It really isn't an extreme left in America. The left is actually the old center.
Right.
Republicans used to be more liberal than Democrats are now. There definitely is an extreme right in America. I think it's on its last legs. I think it's the desperation of people who just don't appreciate the importance of solidarity within a community, and think that everything can be done by self-made men.
Right.
That view was one my parents' generation accepted, but it's not one that youth accepts. So I don't see the current polarization in apocalyptic terms. I think it's a transition, and within a generation, most of what the progressives are pushing will be broadly accepted. An example of that is same-sex marriage, which even 5 years ago was almost unthinkable. 25 years ago, you didn't even know what it meant. And when I was growing up, homosexuality wasn't even mentioned or discussed. So just in the last few years, the progressive position has won out, and that's what's going to happen on a lot of these social questions within a half a generation, I think. This is the last gasp, is what we're seeing.
Well, it's funny. It seems that people are really digging in, and I guess the Olympics are a big representation of what's going on in other countries where you have these anti-gay laws.
Right. The gay movement is just the contemporary topic.
Right.
It's really out of all proportion to the number of people involved, although the success of that movement will have great benefits for heterosexuals as well as homosexuals.
So, dignity just seems like an obvious, how you describe dignity seems like an obvious characteristic that all humanity should be aspiring to. Why is it that it's not at the core of our beliefs or of our actions? Is it a matter of indoctrination? Is it a matter of that we haven't, that it's just a developing characteristic like all evolving characteristics?
Dignity is actually what everyone wants. It's that sense of belonging. It's that sense of being recognized for your contribution and being therefore welcome into the group and being an appreciated member of the group. We all want that. Some people have devoted themselves to denying it to other people because they think they can benefit themselves by doing so. That's what I meant when I said I think the predatory strategy is failing us now. Of course, it can work in the short run. I could go down and rob an old lady passing my house and get away with it for a half an hour. But in the long run, there would be 20 police cars zeroing in on me, and they'd hunt me down, and it really wouldn't pay. The predatory strategy in subtler ways goes on in Wall Street all the time. And gradually we're waking up to it, and the power of the group against predators, once it's organized properly and marshaled, can tame those predators. That's why I'm optimistic that we are in transition from a global predatory strategy that had individual manifestations on over to a broadly dignitarian strategy, both at the international level and the interpersonal level. And I see it in young people. Mm-hmm. If you look at how high school kids treat each other, how grammar school kids treat each other, it's way better than when I was in high school or grammar school. Right. We were incredibly rude and mean to each other. Right. And it's not that behavior is gone, it's that it's in recession. It takes generations to change that kind of behavior. The best example of the generational time involved is with racism. If you look at how whites and blacks interacted 50 years ago, it was appalling and racist in the extreme. Now I can go over to Berkeley High. I live in Berkeley, California, and I begin to think same race couples have ceased to exist. Right. They're all interracial couples. Right. Unthinkable when I was in high school. So, and that's probably just an overshoot, the fact that so many couples are now interracial. But what it shows is we're going to settle down to an equilibrium situation in which couples are formed on the basis of mutual attraction, not on the basis of same race or same gender or same anything.
But do you find also that the group just changes perhaps to nationality or sports team? Or it seems like the Olympics are an interesting example of rankism, literally and figuratively, in the way that you separate yourself from other groups.
Yeah, and sports are a relatively safe place to hold competitiveness. so it doesn't turn into rankism, which is abuse of rank. The Olympics, ideally, are just about rank itself, and that's okay. I mean, you have a race, someone comes in first, second, and third, gold, silver, bronze, no problem, unless the gold medal winner makes fun of or scorns the bronze medal winner. That's rankism. That's the abuse of rank. All he did was win the race on a given day in given climate conditions. He's not inherently superior because he did better that day. And so my analysis does not disparage rank. It's okay to compete if you compete fairly, and it's okay to come in first or 15th. It really doesn't matter. We get better performances out of ourselves when we compete with other people.
And when we are faced with a challenge, I imagine.
Yeah, that's right.
So, which it kind of brings me to something that you mentioned about rankism in a way. Some people suggest that the indignities of the world are what hone our dignity. In other words, are we a species that needs suffering and conflict in order to hone our awareness?
No. I just blurted out no, because I think people work best when they do feel a sense of belonging, when they do feel they can afford to make mistakes. If you look at physics, my field, or art, which I don't know much about, you see that the great practitioners have all made hundreds of mistakes. I love Thomas Edison's remark. He's viewed as having invented the light bulb here in America. And he famously said, I know 50,000 things that don't work.
Right.
He made a lot of mistakes before he came up with the light bulb.
Right.
And Einstein was the same way. He tried 1,000 things that didn't work before he hit upon the right equations. And so to be willing to make mistakes, you need a secure environment. You need to either have the height of a rhinoceros, or you need to be convinced that people won't sneer at you if you make a mistake. So I think a secure environment where belonging is universal, where belonging is accepted and expected, is more conducive to creativity than fear and the threat of scorn.
So is it an individual process then? Because even within groups, don't you find that, isn't that how military works, is by and sports teams? They create this sense of us against the world, this sense of belonging, right?
Yeah, the military does do that. It creates a sense of us versus the bad guys. And sometimes military training can be rankist or non-dignitarian. It can rely on humiliation of people. Though militaries so trained are actually not as good as military that train people for resourcefulness and respect. I know that the American military has worked to reduce the amount of kind of cruel training by sergeants, which you always see depicted in the movies.
Right. So I guess it all comes down to identity. I mean, it seems like some people have an innate sense of dignity or bullying without having to be taught it, and yet some people, it seems, have to learn it. What is the difference between these kinds of people? Have you considered that?
It may have a genetic component, but it's also a secure upbringing. It's having a parent who loved you unconditionally, rather than a parent who was constantly making fun of you, ridiculing you, humiliating you. That will leave a child, when it grows up, with two things. One, with a sense of self-doubt that's hard to overcome in a whole lifetime. No matter how much that person achieves, you always have the doubts that were planted by the parent that relied on humiliation as a way of teaching. And the other thing it will leave a person with is very often a desire to do to others what was done to him. So often a bully is someone who was bullied at home or in some other context. And since he can't get back at the bully at home, who may be his father or uncle or mother, he will take it out on other kids at school who he can get away with it with because they are smaller and weaker. I mean, we wonder why children are bullies. The answer is the adult society is modeling bullying for them everywhere you look,
Right.
often their own parents. Bullying is something that you have to treat as a social disease, not just as one bad boy beating up on people gratuitously. It's always motivated by the fact that he has been beat up himself.
And it's even represented in the leaders of our nations.
Yes, the same pattern you see everywhere. So what our generation is realizing is the damage done by malrecognition, the damage done by humiliation. It lasts for decades after it's done. And the reason we are so impressed by a Mandela when one comes along is because they don't get even. They break the cycle of reciprocal indignification, and they treat their former oppressors with the dignity that those oppressors denied them.
Right.
It's really a turning of the other cheek in a very cautious and sensible way.
And with integrity.
Yeah, done with integrity and done with generosity of spirit. That actually works better for the future of a society which can put forward a leader like that. And that's why we all loved Mandela, because he exemplified that style of behavior.
And it provides such a stark contrast between perspectives of behaving.
Yeah.
So you personally, when you're in a moment of conflict, internal conflict,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure that, like all of us, you must have those moments where some part of you feel sense a bit of duality. Some part of you does get emotional, angry, maybe perhaps, or humiliated.
Sure.
And another part is kind of reasonable. What do you do? How soon can you catch those moments, and how do you become how do you make the choice of who to be in that moment?
Now, that's a great question. I don't always catch them. Sometimes a sneer comes out of me. Sometimes a rankist behavior comes out of me. Yeah. Sometimes a racist behavior, I can find it in my head. You know, I may know enough and have learned enough to suppress it from my lips. Yeah. But having been raised in a completely racist environment and a completely homophobic environment, naturally my brain generates racist and homophobic slurs. Right. And rankist ones, which I've only in the last few decades become more alert to. I mean, long after I had learned to suppress racist, sexist, and homophobic remarks, I was still uttering rankist remarks. Right. Then I realized that all those other kind of disparagements were examples of rankism. They were all situations in which I was holding myself superior to other people. Maybe a bookstore clerk who'd never heard of Tolstoy, and I would sneer at her for that, right. You know. Right. Many other examples. So the first thing you do is you use political correctness to suppress the bad behavior. So I'm in that stage with regard to rankism. I'm politically correct. I almost always catch the impulse to do it before it's emitted, right. And I suppress it successfully. Right. Then I try to figure out later what I could have said that would have won, what I could have said to the person that wouldn't have been rankist, that would have respected their dignity. If the person triggered my rankism by rankism towards me, which is usually the case, someone denigrates me or disparages me, that provokes a rankist response in return, which I'm learning to suppress. Then it's harder. Then you have to figure a way of correcting the person that preserves their dignity, both at the same time, and that often takes 2 weeks of thinking. And then I have it ready next time that same provocation occurs.
Well, it's funny how our internal struggles, if you want to call it, reflect in the world.
Yes. It's the world's big problem. When I speak to high school audiences, I tell them that our generation interrupted racism, sexism, and homophobia. We haven't completely eliminated them, but we put them on notice. Right. Your generation, I say to these 15-year-olds, has to do the same with regard to rankism, and it's a harder problem.
Right. You know, it's funny what you're mentioning about you'll pick up some default responses that you're not even conscious of. I recently, a few years ago, I did a documentary of Latin American immigrants in Canada. And I was interviewing them, and I, without even knowing it, I was shocked that they were all doctors, and they weren't janitors. And I didn't even know that I had that assumption about Latin American people. And it shocked me, actually, that I was surprised every time I would talk to, because it was about a choir. They were in a choir, so I didn't know what their jobs were until I started interviewing them. They'd all joined a choir because singing for Latin Americans is part of their culture.
Yeah.
So it's funny how the culture has ingrained things into me, assumptions that I didn't even have a part of or even know until it was reflected back to me in my response.
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. We overcome these stereotypes all our life long.
Yeah, exactly. And
what you really do is admit them and move past them. First, you do it by suppressing impulses, and later it moves from the mind down to the heart.
Right.
But that can take 50 years.
Yeah. Well, it's a lifetime process, isn't it, to hone our beings?
Right.
So you personally, do you have a spiritual bent? And by spiritual, I don't necessarily mean religious. Do you believe there is a supreme consciousness or a universal design? Do you have any sense of that aspect of life?
Well, I don't use that language so much to express it, but I think I do have the equivalent of those views in just in a secular way. Mm-hmm. I'm not a deist or a subscriber to any particular religion, but I've learned an awful lot by studying Christianity and Buddhism and Judaism and especially Hinduism. They have, at their best, understood a lot of these things before any other discipline. Right. The problem is they surround it with a lot of ritual and exclusive behaviors and claim superiority.
Right.
But if you just look at the best in these religions, they all converge on what I call a dignitarian world.
So it's like you were saying, when you take the rankism out of religion, all you're left with is dignity.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah. That's a good summary. Yeah, the rankism is widespread and very deep in every form of human organization, certainly in religion.
And it reflects our duality, right, that we struggle with.
Yes, but it's not that the duality is permanent. We can actually rid an organization of rankism completely. We haven't rid very many organizations of it yet, but we're beginning to, and certain families have successfully eliminated rankism from their interpersonal dealings with each other, and they're families we love to be around.
So would you agree that we have free will as a being?
Well, I don't think of it that way, because I don't think the self is that real of an entity. I think of the self as consisting of my genome and what I call my menome. And my menome is all of the experience I've had all my life that's wired up my brain as it's now wired, and it's constantly changing. The result of this conversation is, in fact, going to change my menome. It's not going to affect my genome very much, but it's going to affect my menome a lot. And that's the reason you're doing it, Randall. You wish to impact the menomes of your viewers.
Right.
And so it's there it's with that I identify selfhood, with the genome and the menome. And I don't think of it as transposable. I don't think it makes sense to talk of time travel, because you can't take yourself with you. Yourself is a product of your whole history, and it's changed by everything you do, and so it's not transposable. We can't literally get in other people's shoes because we don't have their particular history, but we can be respectful towards other people's equally significant histories.
Well, the self is actually, I'm glad you mentioned the self, because to me the self is the core at everything that's going on here, and honing the self. I mean, it seems that by what you're trying to do is get people to actually get in touch with the self and be conscious of that moment. And that's, I guess, where free will comes in. If there is such a thing as free will, is what we talked about earlier, to be conscious of the moment to decide who you want to be in that moment?
Well, people talk of free will because they realize how unpredictable they seem to be themselves and other people are. But the more we learn, the more we can predict behavior. And we've pretty much reduced all the bodily functions to complete understanding now. We haven't quite understood the brain. That's the only organ we don't understand fully yet, but we will understand it fully in time. Just as we understand the heart, we don't think of the heart any longer as the seat of the soul. We think of the heart as a pump made of meat, and if it's defective, we go in and fix it. Well, we're going to eventually see the brain the same way, and then there'll still be things we can't predict about what the brain is going to do. And even when we do predict them pretty well, there'll be new theories coming on that predict them better. So there's always an element of freedom in the whole situation.
Right. So are we biological, psychological, or spiritual beings? Are we a combination of these different aspects of our awareness?
Yes, we're a combination of our genome and our menome. We are I never quite know what people mean by the spiritual side.
Yeah,
it's a nice sounding word,
exactly.
But if you ask everyone what they mean by it, they all mean different things by it.
Yeah.
So I tend to shun that language while not denying it to anyone else for whom it's useful.
Right. I agree. Spiritual is like a word like God. Who knows what somebody means by that, or love even. But I guess by spiritual, what I mean when I say it, like biological, obviously we have a biological imperatives. Right.
Right.
Psychological, obviously, the psychological part is in a way what we appeal to when we're talking, the reason. But it seems like consciousness for a human has this other aspect that is more abstract, and is separate from psychological and biological, but it's an awareness of the self. Now, I don't know what that can mean for different people. I guess people put those into structures like religion, that feeling. But do you sense that aspect within yourself?
In the sense that I see myself as constantly changing, I do. The trouble with reifying selfhood is it tends to reify something static. And I see my mind and brain and body as changing every day through every interaction. And I think that's a useful stance because that is, in fact, the way the world is. It is changing. Sometimes we don't notice it because it changes slowly compared to a human lifetime. But when you stand back and look at the changes in attitudes that people have from age 5 to age 50 to age 100, it's really that. I mean, I'm more like my friends today than I'm like my former self 50 years ago. That guy who was then 25 is way different from me now, way more different than a 25-year-old who lives as a neighbor.
And what is the difference for you?
My attitudes are much more those of my 25-year-old neighbor than they are the attitudes of my 20-year-old former self. He was a bigot. He didn't even know it, but he actually was prejudiced against gays and other minority groups. How could it be different? I mean, everyone in the generation older than me was that way, and that's the only thing they taught. It was my generation's destiny to see that those views were wrong and to change them and to teach the world that they're wrong, and the tolerance and acceptance is spreading at the speed of light around the world as we speak.
So when you do sit and watch the news in the evening, or just do you ever feel despair?
Totally. It's completely depressing. The news out of Syria right now is almost unwatchable. It is such a horror.
And how do you deal with that?
Well, I deal with it in two ways. Yes, it is a horror. The horror of the Holocaust was also a horror, and the genocides are getting smaller and rarer, and we really ought to do something to eliminate the last of them. And maybe we will eventually, but for the time being, there are still big powers that block doing anything to rid the world of genocides. There's always some big power that protects a genocidal tyrant. But that time will pass. I mean, when I was a kid, the police could not go in and stop a man who was beating up his wife. It happened recently on my street. There were 20 police cars surrounding that house, and a SWAT team went in and took that guy off in handcuffs. That would have been unthinkable when I was a child, because then a man's home was his castle and he could do whatever he wanted in it. So we have SWAT teams for communal behavior in our communities that's unacceptable. We don't yet have a global SWAT team. We will. And after which time, genocides will become exceedingly rare, and then they will vanish entirely. Meanwhile, we have Syria, we have Darfur, we have South Sudan, we have terrible things going on, and all we can do is work to bring about the global SWAT team sooner. There are people working on that. The United States representative to the United Nations is Samantha Powers. She wrote the book on global SWAT teams, and she cannot prevail in the UN because the Chinese and the Russians are blocking action on Syria. But we have someone there representing, I like to think, all of North America in our view that we should not stand by and tolerate genocide.
Is it just a matter of then having patience as a person who feels like somewhat sane in the world and seeing all the insanity, and not just internationally, but just driving down the street,
right?
The behaviors of people. There's insanity everywhere. From
everywhere, yeah.
Is it just a matter of being patient and waiting for humanity to catch up to?
Well, you have to work like hell and be patient at the same time. I mean, I devote every day, all day, 7 days a week, as I think you do, to spreading these new memes. Yeah. And it's great good work you're doing, Randall, spreading these memes across North America, and I hope further, anywhere that the internet can be accessed, can get your programs. And a lot of us are working at that full time. Meanwhile, we have to be patient, I suppose, although a dose of impatience never hurt anybody when it comes to ending genocide.
It seems like Canada has always been a fairly liberal country.
Yeah.
And we have a very right-wing, for us, a very right-wing government, and with the tar sands, and they're just pushing a lot of things down people's throats. But it seems that there is a substantial portion of the population that just buy into it. That this is because things are the way they are now, this is the way that they have to be, and they always will be. How do you break that? I guess, how do you affect change? How do you really affect people? I guess just by spreading your truth and hope that whoever connects with it does connect with it? Is that what you do?
And people are connecting with it. I mean, when I introduced the word rankism and the idea of a dignitarian society, most people made fun of it. No American publisher would touch it. That's why I published the book in Vancouver from New Society Publishers. We're the only people who would touch it. And I found Canadians far more open to the ideas than I did Americans. But I've been working at it now for 10 years, and now it's taken for granted, actually. And if you Google the word rankism, instead of getting 3 returns, you get 30,000.
Right.
So the memes are spreading.
Yeah.
And when I do speak at high schools or at colleges, I find a complete universal acceptance of these ideas. And that generation is going to succeed in putting rankism on notice in all its many guises. And so that's why I'm optimistic that eventually these won't be the central problems faced by humankind. There'll be new problems. It's not that we'll be out of work. There'll be huge new problems. But the old problems, which are the problems of the isms, I think we can handle them over the course of the 21st century.
What is the most important thing in life for you?
Well, it's ask another question.
Okay.
Keep going, Randall.
Okay,
Keep
I'm trying
trying. It's such a general question.
I know.
There's so many things I could say, and
I
I
know.
want you to get
Yeah, you know what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to get out of people, and this is I've had troubles with this question. I'm trying to get out of a billionaire capitalist. I'm trying to get out of what's your motivation for being alive? What's your purpose for being alive in your own idea of yourself? For him, it's waking up and making more money that day than he had the day before. I mean, to
Right.
me, that's a brilliant contrast with someone else, and I'm trying to get that out of people. I'm trying to find the right way of drawing that. So
Right.
for purpose, let's go into purpose. Um,
Well, if you take a guy like Bill Gates, who lives pretty near Vancouver,
mhm,
I think he had motives that went far beyond making more money each day. I think he really wanted to see a computer, the tool of a computer on every desk in the world. And in fact, the minute he'd achieved that, he quit and created a foundation, which now wants to wipe out malaria
right,
and polio. So some of these billionaire capitalists actually want to serve,
for sure.
and others just want to serve themselves. And we shouldn't lump them all together. I'm not saying you're doing that. I know
No,
you don't do that, but none of us should do that. And I also think making money is a surrogate for a way of measuring oneself, just like an athlete might strive for quicker times in a race. Capitalists strive to make more money just as a way of keeping score. But if you can't appeal to their better side, and most of them actually want to improve society, and some of them do that by, some of them have ideas about that I don't share, but like the tar sands kind of exploitation. So I don't have anything to say about that really.
yeah, and no,
But
I don't want to present an us against them perspective, and a
yeah,
billionaire capitalist that says that's his mantra represents he's a leader of an archetype that represents many people who don't have any money. So
right.
it's just a perspective that they have. I don't want to lump everybody that has money as being that kind of a person.
No, I know you weren't doing that.
So what would you say then? Your do you have a sense of purpose that
Yeah, I mean, I I hate to see that, as does almost everyone, the suffering in the world, and I think our purpose comes right out of a kind of innate empathy we have with other people, which hates to see them suffering, because it makes it is experienced as suffering ourselves. It's not just that you're being good or nice or saintly or something. It's that you're trying to relieve the suffering in yourself that their suffering induces in you. So you set out to feed the hungry, to end famine, to end genocide, uh, to change a school culture in which humiliation is par for the course into a school culture where every child's dignity is respected at all times. Why? Because they'll learn more that way. I ran an experiment in a Seattle ghetto school 50 years ago in which we replaced humiliation with dignity for every kid in the class. And lo and behold, they learned wonderfully once they believed it was real. So I know that works, and my main purpose in life right now is spreading the dignity meme, because I think as that becomes second nature, we're going to find ourselves all on the same side, and we better get all on the same side, because some of the problems coming down the pike are really species threatening problems. Climate change is one that everyone knows about, but another one that's coming very rapidly is that we human beings are destined to create machines smarter than we are. I don't just mean faster. We've already done that. And that looked impossible when I was a kid. We did that. We've got machines now that are trillions of times faster than we are at arithmetical sums, but we're going to also create machines that are more creative than we are. We're going to create machines that work like brains, but that aren't constrained to being just as fitting inside of a skull. And so they're going to be more creative, and that's going to change the status of human beings. And that is a very big problem that we're just beginning to come to terms with as neuroscientists figure out how the brain does work and come to understand that organ as we understand all the other organs in the body. So I see that as a great epical problem that will be on our desks by the end of this century. And we're going to all need to be on the same. We can't be involved in petty little quarrels, sectarian strife, if we're going to deal successfully with that species-threatening problem and others like it.
And on kind of a parallel level there, with genetic modification, the fact that they're creating new creatures all the time, or new beings, who knows what that holds for our future as well. I mean,
exactly, and it's not going to be possible to stop it, because even if we should stop it in America and Canada, the Chinese are going to try it.
right.
And if there's great benefit in it, they're going to use that to exploit us. So, or vice versa. I'm not saying they're bad and we're good. Maybe we're going to be the ones that develop it, and they're going to be the ones that outlaw it. In any case, somebody's going to try it. These are the kind of problems. This is exactly the kind of problem, like climate change and understanding the human brain, that we need to get on top of. And we've just begun to address them. I want to put an end to sectarian wars and other wars, and as soon as possible, so we can liberate everyone to think about these much more threatening problems.
So you're a very eloquent speaker, and I'm going to kind of put you on a spot here, if you're able. If you had like a 30-second meme, a little 30-second speech you could make to the world, and you spent a lifetime honing your understanding of what could benefit humanity, what would you say? What could you say?
I would say dignity is your right. As a human being, dignity is your right, but it's also everyone else's. And there's the catch. If it's everyone else's, it means you have to treat other people in ways that respect their dignity at all times, both interpersonally and through the institutions we build. We can hide indignity within institutional frameworks that we would never be willing to perpetrate ourselves in our own name. Situations now, such as the minimum wage we pay people, is a form of institutional indignity. No one should work for less than a living wage. Making higher education accessible to some and not to others because it's been priced out of the market, that's an institutional indignity. Any healthcare system that doesn't provide universal healthcare is institutional indignity. And Canada's led the way on several of these things. You're definitely in advance of the United States when it comes to access to higher education and access to healthcare. So these are ways in which we can extend dignity to every last person, regardless of all the differentiating characteristics people may have, and even extend it, I think, in time to other animals and beings of all sorts. And then the world will be a place where everyone feels they belong. And it won't be that we'll all be alike. We'll still have people who are far faster runners and better mathematicians and better dancers than other people. But that's no basis for visiting indignity on the people who aren't as good at some particular thing. So that would be my little speech. I'm afraid it exceeded 30 seconds. It was probably 2 minutes, but I could shave it back.
That was awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think the work you're doing in spreading these memes globally is great work, and keep it up.
Well, I'm just spreading the word to people like yourself, so it's an honor. It's an honor and a pleasure to have spoken with you and to have you be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall.
Okay.